A few years ago, Africa used to be the continent with the most affordable housing or cheaper real estate. But I don't think that's the case anymore. Even in Nigeria, where I'm from, the housing is so expensive, especially if you talk about the big cities like Lagos. And I decided to look into why this is. The video we're going to be checking out today is titled, What's Driving the Housing Crisis in African Countries? Let's get to it.
Yeah. The country is facing a critical housing shortage with a deficit of nearly 2 million units. Now, earlier this year, the government passed the controversial levy that forces employed Kenyans to contribute 1.5% of their income towards housing construction. It claims that this levy will finance the construction of 200,000 affordable houses annually. But how realistic is that? And will it be affordable enough for the thousands of homeless people on the margins of poverty? DW's Edith Kimani reports from Nairobi.
A car mechanic by training, Anthony Mutunga, better known as T, spends most of his time with friends these days. The 32-year-old lost his job unexpectedly, and for the last 2 years, he's been homeless. The sudden and dramatic change in T's life led him here, to Mathare, one of Kenya's oldest slums, and to a very different life.
It's hard. It's hard. It's very, very hard. When you're in a capital city, you'd rather sleep hungry, but at least have somewhere to sleep. Shelter is a priority because you don't know what could happen to you when you're out here. There are thieves out here, diseases, police, and there are also the unknowns.
Did he say police? So when the police are constituting nuisance for them?
There are thieves out here, diseases, police, and there are also the unknowns.
T needs 11 euros a month for rent here, but he's rarely called to fix cars these days, so food is all he can afford. It's getting dark, and the clouds have gathered. Rain is inevitable. Everyone rushes towards their homes as though by command. T leads us to a shack where a friend is allowing him to stay. The shack is damp and dark, and T knows he'll have to pay something or leave in a few days, so he keeps his things ready. In this environment, he has no control.
There are 2 of us who sleep here, but if friends come over, we welcome them here as well.
The following day, Nairobi's homeless wake up before dawn.
Now, I know in North America, a lot of people, or there are a lot of homeless people, but it's usually not like this in Africa. Homelessness in Africa is not very paramount. The reason is because people have like family houses or like siblings or somewhere where they can always fall back to in cases where they don't have a house, compared to like in North America where everybody's mostly independent. So for this to be in Africa is a very big problem, because usually a lot of times, especially like in Nigeria, you always have a family where you can go stay with. Or worst case scenario, let's say you can't make it in the big city, you go back to the village and stay with your family. So for these people to not have housing where they can even stay, not even a family house, not even a sibling's house, it's a big problem. It's a very big challenge.
Cocooned in sacks for warmth, most sleep fully dressed in their overalls and shoes, ready for work during the day. It's estimated that some 300,000 people in Kenya live this way. For people like Jeff, 3 euros a day can be the difference between living on the streets or here, in a windowless room with nothing but a bed and mattress. The clothes vendor sometimes finds the money, sometimes he doesn't. Life on the edge of homelessness.
It's easy to get stuck in this routine. You look for money for food and a room. If you buy drugs or alcohol, that's all you get. And your money is gone. Just like that.
We're back in Mathare to look for T, who we're told might be in the local drinking den. Here we find the owner Doreen, who offers her space to those with nowhere to go.
This is a life I've experienced, so I don't judge anyone. I give them somewhere to sleep, so when they get out of here, they can help others.
Her customers ask us to tell their stories.
We have problems like we've never seen before. Our houses were demolished, and everyone was asking where we could go. We still don't know what to do. But God bless this woman.
She's a community celebrity
Doreen's
now.
den can sleep up to 9 men, and T has been one of them in the past. But tonight he's fortunate to have somewhere less crowded to sleep, at least for now.
Let's get more from Miriam Minor, a consultant in town planning, urban data, and analytics for African towns and cities. Hello and welcome.
But wait, even when they build the houses, how would the people afford the houses? I don't think this is just a housing crisis. I feel like this might also be like should I say, a poverty thing. It could be a lot more than housing, because how can they afford it? Especially if the government is building the houses and the housing would be owned by the government. So who would pay for it, and how would they pay for it if they can't even make up to €3 in a day?
To the program. There's critical housing shortage in Kenya. Some reports suggest that an estimated 300,000 people are homeless. Tell us more about what is driving this.
Thank you very much. So some of the challenges that come around creating a lot of homelessness in Kenya is the fact that the growing population does not have adequate housing that is affordable, but also in the right locations where residents would need to live. So if you're trying to get to a city, access jobs, you also want housing that is within your budget within that town. So too much demand and too little supply creates conditions whereby prices are either too high or there's just not enough housing, and that creates conditions of homelessness among the population.
Right, which we saw in our report. So to try to address a housing crisis, the government introduced a controversial housing levy to continue collecting 1.5% of a worker's monthly pay, right? The levy is intended to pay for the construction of 200,000 affordable housing for poorer Kenyans each year. How realistic is that?
The challenge, I think, comes in when the levies are too much for the workers, perhaps too much in terms of the taxation that is happening on population. But at the same time, how long would it take for these levies at the fund to generate this kind of housing or the numbers of housing that are needed? So most of the critique and challenges you're hearing in the market is the taxation is already too high. So people are being taxed more than they can bear.
Right.
Additionally, even though the policies can support the production of housing, if it doesn't happen fast enough, or if the housing does not end up being affordable enough for residents, then we still have a problem, even though people are being taxed to produce more housing.
So like, yeah, that's the thing, affordable enough. So would the government just dash these houses after they build it, or would people still have to pay for these houses? Because if these people can make €3 a day, how are they going to pay for the houses? That's the question. Because you can build houses. Like in Vancouver where I live, there are a lot of houses. Even in China, there are a lot of houses. There are houses everywhere. In Nigeria, there are a lot of houses. But a lot of people cannot afford these houses, and that's why there's a housing crisis. So would that be the case here?
Should the government just build free houses for people?
Good question.
Well, free housing comes with its own different problem, but you've already mentioned the key challenge. When people talk about housing affordability, the question is, how do you make housing affordable to households? Number one, you can raise income so that people can afford the housing that's already there.
What I was saying.
Or you can.
So this might be a poverty problem rather than a housing problem, or it could be a combination of both.
Keep trying to build more houses, and the question is, who is able to afford the houses that you're building? But the solution, I would not think, is the government trying to take over the role of housing production, because number one, Kenya is not necessarily an economy that can support mass housing programs. And number two, governments that have tried to build more and more housing, you find that you can never build enough housing as a government for the demand that is continuing to happen in the cities and in the counties. So the question is not necessarily build free houses. I think is perhaps support the housing markets that there are, is what I would say.
Can you share some, practical initiatives that could help solve the housing crisis?
Yeah, thank you. And I think we really underestimate the current patterns of investment that are happening in African cities. So if you look at cities like Nairobi, where we are, where the research is happening, in Lagos, in Cape Town, in Johannesburg, what you see is there's already a housing market that is working, perhaps not the best, but there is a housing market. Rental markets in Nairobi, for example, are really robust. The challenge is perhaps the very low income households still don't have enough to access or enter the housing ladder. So while national governments are trying to come up with large scale policies, which is what I think the housing fund, the housing levy is, it's a countrywide exercise trying to generate housing. What cities should do, I think it's a city government to look at its conditions and say, what is our housing market? Nairobi, for example, is very high percent rental. So Nairobi's policies should be leveraging government policies to improve rental markets within their boundaries. So that is to begin to use the markets that are there to say what is happening with the rental that is making people unable to afford. How can we support rental or subsidize it to ensure that current markets are being improved, for example, higher quality rental, but affordable rental. So as opposed to trying to change the cities from how they're doing, it's come in, meet them where they are and improve them and make them work better for the lower income households in the cities. I think those are the strategies. The cities that are trying to do that are moving faster or at least getting closer to bridging the affordability gap than cities that are trying to introduce entirely new policies that are against the current markets in the city.
Thanks a lot for your time. Miriam Maina, consultant in town planning, urban data and analytics for African towns and cities.
Okay, I think we can end this one right there. So my concern, especially when I was in Nigeria, was the cost of housing, the cost of real estate. It's almost comparable to places in North America. But the question is, or the problem there is, people in Nigeria don't earn as much as people living in North America. So why is the housing comparable to the cost of housing comparable to that of people living in North America? And that's something the government has to immediately intervene, or at least I want to limit how expensive houses are, because I don't think cost of building houses in Nigeria is as expensive as cost of building houses in North America. I think it's significantly cheaper. It's just people raising these prices so they can make more money. And since there are maybe foreigners out living in those regions, they're able to purchase those houses in Lagos, and the government just let it be. But the problem is going to happen when the people, the Nigerians, cannot afford their houses, but other people who live outside can afford their houses. This is the same problem in Ghana, the same problem in, I would think, Kenya as well is having kind of the same problem. So yeah, housing does not have to be this expensive in Africa. We don't earn as much as, or the people living there don't earn as much as people living in North America. So why is houses as expensive as that? You know, an average, I was hearing a house like $3 million for a normal house, and it just doesn't make any sense, especially pricing the houses in dollars. Why don't you price it in Naira and make it a lot cheaper? Anyways, those are just my thoughts, but let me know what you think about that. If there's anything you want to share, add, contribute, critique, feel free to do so in the comment section. Smash the like button, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.